Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the presentation of the colors by the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Color Guard Unit, followed by the playing of the national anthem by the President's own Marine Band Brass Quintet. Ladies and gentlemen, providing our invocation this morning is Father Leo Blasi of Hays, Kansas.
O good and gracious God, through the long sweep of time and within the vastness of the universe, we find ourselves in this present moment and in this particular place. And it is here that we acknowledge you and we praise you. In your infinite wisdom, you have guided those who came before us in good times as well as bad. You have moved this nation in times of peace and when distrust between peoples erupted in war. By their perseverance, we continue to know of your mercy and grace. We now implore you to continue to direct your works and to order our lives, that they may be dedicated to you and to praise your glory. We are privileged to come together today in this happy occasion. We ask you to bless our endeavors to work for the work that has begun and the structures that are to be set in place. Throughout history, nations and empires have built shrines and temples to deify their great leaders, to ask them to reward their worship. In this great land, we build monuments as memorials to shining examples of service to the country and to its people. You have blessed this nation with many such examples, and a number of these people have served in the military, and others have served in this nation's highest office as president. Many have done both, and 3 have held the highest rank in the military and the office of presidency: Washington, Grant, and Eisenhower. This great country has seen so many blessings and so much prosperity, yet we have so often fallen short of the potential that you have given to us. Still, we are a nation of peoples who have always come together in a time of need. We have most recently experienced this cohesive response to natural disasters that have affected so many of our communities, whether hurricanes, fires, or floods. We ask you, Lord, that this facility might always be a reminder of what it means to be American, that all who visit here may understand the true meaning of sacrifice and selfless service to our nation and to our neighbor. Finally, Lord, we ask you to be with us, to lift us up on our journey to our eternal home. Help us always to be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming to the stage Greta Van Susteren.
Good morning, and please be seated. Welcome to this very special and long-awaited event, the groundbreaking for the memorial honoring President Dwight D. Eisenhower. We're gathered today to honor a remarkable man who left our nation a unique legacy. As our 34th president, he was the most recent and probably the last general to become President of the United States. During World War II, he served as Supreme Allied Commander, the brilliant military strategist who defeated the Nazis and led the Allies to victory in Europe. After the war, as NATO commander, he created new strategies to deter communism. As president, he served as commander-in-chief in the struggle against communism, becoming the leader of the free world. He took strong stands to ensure equality and opportunity for Americans of all races, genders, and creeds. And of course, his vision for an America on the move gave us the federal highway system and the FAA. In fact, many of the government agencies that came into being during President Eisenhower's presidency, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, now the Departments of HHS and Education, the FAA, and NASA, surround this site, which will from now on be known as Eisenhower Square. There are many, many people here today whom we want to recognize. They have played a role in making this very special day become a reality. We want to recognize Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, and Deputy Secretary of the Interior David Bernhardt. And from the House of Representatives, we're delighted to have with us several members from both sides of the aisle: Representative Marcy Kaptur, Representative Stephen Palazzo, Chairman Rob Bishop, Congressman Darrell Issa, Congressman Mike Gallagher, Congressman Mark Amadei, Congressman Craig Estes, Congressman Kevin Yoder, and Congresswoman Betty McCollum. And from the great state of Kansas, Ike's home, President Eisenhower's home, we're happy to welcome Governor Sam Brownback. And of course, it's Ike's special honor to have with us several members of the Diplomatic Corps representing some of the countries allied with the United States during and after World War II. Ambassador Gerard Rowe from France, and from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, Joseph Chang. Finally, we want to recognize Brigadier General Carl Riddell, the Executive Director of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. The General and his team have worked tirelessly to ensure the vision of the memorial to Dwight David Eisenhower has become a reality, playing a significant role in making this day happen. So thank you to him and his team for all the hard work and the leadership. Today's first speaker, Congressman Mike Thompson. He's the Vice Chairman of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. He represents the 5th District of California, which includes all of Napa and parts of Sonoma, Central, Contra Costa, Lake and Solano counties. And of course, these are areas recently tragically devastated by those wildfires. A Vietnam veteran, Congressman Thompson served as a platoon leader in Vietnam. A strong advocate of our nation's veterans, he co-chairs the Military Veterans Caucus and has been a strong advocate of the Eisenhower Memorial in Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Greta. It's a pleasure to be here today, and it's great to now be able to see the finish line of this incredible project. It's my honor to introduce you to some of the people who have helped make this happen. First, my fellow commissioners, Representative Stanford Bishop from Georgia, Representative Mike Simpson of Idaho, Representative Mac Thornberry of Texas, Senator Thad Cochran of Mississippi, Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and of course, our great friend and leader, Chairman Pat Roberts of Kansas. With us today, we also have two presidential appointed commissioners, Susan Baines Harris and Alfred Gildolig. When a commission has been in business as long as this one, we have some commissioners who are either no longer serving or sadly no longer with us. I want to introduce two very special people whose husbands inspired this memorial many years ago, Irene Hirono Inoue and Kathy Stevens. Thank you for joining us. This is a special moment today for many of us, and we're honored to be joined by members of the Eisenhower family, Susan, Anne, Wolfgang, David, Merrill, Adriana, and Nicholas. We also have some impressive brass with us today. General P.X. Kelly, former Commandant of the Marine Corps and co-chair of the Advisory Committee. Representing the USS Eisenhower, Captain Craig Sikola. And Brigadier General Stephen Gilland, representing the United States Military Academy at West Point. Building a memorial takes a lot of resources, and we have some great help in that area. I'd like to introduce former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, the co-chairman of the Finance Committee. We're very honored to have with us 4 World War II veterans, Floyd Rankin, David Levy, Elizabeth Ruth Morris, and John Showalter. Let's give them a big hand. It takes a team to move a project like this along. You've met our elected officials, the Eisenhower family, and the fundraisers, but the people with the real hard job are the ones who have to take the legacy of this great American and translate it into a memorial park in our nation's capital. We're fortunate to have the world-renowned Frank Gehry leading an incredible design team for this project. Frank, you and your team have created a masterpiece that will be visited by millions of Americans and visitors from around the world for centuries to come, and we're incredibly grateful. You have a fantastic team. The sculptor who's bringing President Eisenhower to life in bronze, Sergei Ianabekov. The artist and engineer who will be creating a one-of-a-kind metal tapestry, also a fellow Californian, Thomas Osinski. And may I ask the team from Geary Partners to please stand, and their joint venture partner, IECOM. Please stand and give them a hand. Now, if you'll please turn your attention to the screen behind me for the video honoring Ike.
We must be ready to dare all for our country. For history does not long entrust the care of freedom to the weak or the timid. We must be willing, individually and as a nation, to accept whatever sacrifices may be required of us. A people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both.
We have heroes in America. Lincoln, Washington. Look at the great statues and the monuments in Washington. And Dwight Eisenhower was the hero, and he was a nonpartisan hero in America.
As a military leader, as the president, and as a citizen deeply dedicated to democracy, Dwight D. Eisenhower compiled a record of public service that has won him a unique place in the history of this country and the world in the 20th century. The Eisenhower Memorial will honor his legacy as the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe during World War II and as the 34th President of the United States.
In order to do something, it has to have some gravitas. It has to be borderline a work of art of some kind. The story will be pretty powerful. We would use these blocks and carve the sayings into those, and so give it some dignity for a memorial to such a great man. I found a person who was never going to give up. Here's a guy that made the world a different place for all of us, a better place.
Here was Eisenhower, who, after he left Kansas, was in the military his whole life, and then he led the D-Day invasion, came out a 5-star general, became president of Colombia, later went back as the first Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, our forces in Europe, and he was used to making big decisions. One thing I always liked about Eisenhower is he never tried to be too flowery. He always just explained his position, said, here's what I believe, here's what I'm going to do, and here's why. And it made a lot of sense to me.
I think he taught us that in this 21st century, as it was fundamentally in the 20th century, ultimately our security is provided by bridges. His entire career was the building of coalitions within the U.S. Army, within the Allied structure in the Second World War. And I would argue the absolute apotheosis of his ability to create bridges was the work he did in bringing NATO to life. And like all of us, I think, in the military today, we draw inspiration from General Eisenhower, who became President Eisenhower, but we cherish him for his role as an active duty officer in the military. He was extraordinary in so many different dimensions.
You look at that generation, you look at those men and those women that had fought in World War II and those that had given their life in Normandy and elsewhere for our generation. They're the generation that have lived those values that we aspire to today. Some very tough times and some very difficult circumstances. When leadership was needed the most, they answered the call of duty and they provided what our nation needed. They served their country not only to our national defense, but also as President Eisenhower did as President of the United States. They are the role models for our cadets today. They are the shoulders on who our cadets now stand.
President Eisenhower, Ike, embodied the values Midwesterners prize: determination and tenacity. When faced with a challenge, he stayed focused. When faced with adversity, he didn't stop. He never gave in. There's another Kansan who embodies those qualities, and without him, I'm not sure we would all be here today. As chairman of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, Senator Pat Roberts has worked with unyielding focus, determination, and tenacity to ensure that this memorial to President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a fellow Kansan and a hero to millions across the globe, would become a reality. And today, of course, that reality begins. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a truly great American, the senator from Kansas, a senior senator from Kansas, Senator Pat Roberts.
I think I'm going to ask Greta to introduce me every time I get up to talk. Thank you, Greta, for that introduction, and thank you so much for your long-standing support for this project. You have been a true soldier in the Eisenhower Memorial Army in helping to get us here today. I know I speak for all gathered for this memorable event when I say it is great to be here today. First, let us reflect for a moment about a few members of the greatest generation who brought us to this place today, Ted Stevens and Danny Inouye, two giants in the Senate who authored the legislation to create the Eisenhower Memorial. When Ted and Danny started us down this path, it was both an honor and privilege for me, a new senator from Kansas, to be asked to help memorialize our most famous Kansan, Dwight David Eisenhower. Then there is our chairman emeritus, Rocco Siciliano, another World War II veteran. For over a decade, Rocco led our efforts. He did so with the qualities that made him successful in government and the private sector, integrity and inclusion. When Rocco called me and said it was time to pass the leadership torch and would I agree to succeed him as chairman, I said it would be an honor, but there was a qualification. I called another World War II vet, a great American who fought for our country on the battlefield, in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and on the campaign trail as our Republican nominee for president. Another really great Kansan, Bob Dole, who also played a key role in making the World War II Memorial a reality. I said, Bob, I can't do this without you. And as he has always done when his country called, he said, Pat, Ike is my hero. I'm in. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure we would be standing here today without the support of Bob Dole, who stepped in as finance chairman of the memorial. He called all the former presidents and vice presidents and asked them to come on board, and not one of them said no. We were hoping Bob could join us today, but please join me in thanking him for his lifelong commitment and service to our nation and to this project. Bob, thank you. And I know we would not be standing here today without the support and the vision of the Eisenhower family. Their commitment to making sure this memorial appropriately captured their grandfather as both general and president has ensured generations of Americans will know his legacy. I think you're supposed to clap here, folks. Every time I stop, you clap. Got it? Okay, here we go. Being an Eisenhower fan is something of a tradition in the Roberts family. In 1952, when I was just 15 years old, I was with my dad, Wes Roberts, at the Republican National Convention in Chicago, and I watched Ike receive the nomination, hard fought, on the first ballot to be our party's candidate for President of the United States. Quite an experience. Later, during his inauguration, I met President Eisenhower. When he entered the room, whether you immediately saw him or not, everyone knew it. With that ruddy face and great smile, he had that special charisma. And when I shook his hand that day, I never dreamed I would be here this day leading the effort for his memorial on the National Mall. After all these years, why do we still like Ike? If he had done nothing else in life, his service as Supreme Allied Commander, savior of Western democracy, should earn him the respect and admiration of every human being whose life, peace, and prosperity that victory made possible. But it isn't just the magnitude of his service that we revere. It is the manner in which he served, the quiet humility, the strength, and the resolve. The man was so humble that upon the surrender of the German army, his message back to Washington simply said, mission accomplished. Ike may not have coined the phrase, speak softly and carry a big stick, but he did embody it. It was not necessary for him to raise his voice or wave his arms to project strength. Those were the tactics of his adversaries. He spoke quietly. He did not make idle threats. Yet when he did speak, the force of his words was clear. The story of Dwight David Eisenhower is the story of America. His ascendancy parallels America's. At the end of the 19th century, Eisenhower was still a young man in Kansas, and America was a young democracy, isolated and protected by two vast oceans. Over the course of his career, America matured both politically and culturally, like that young man who left Abilene, Kansas to go to West Point. By the time Eisenhower retired from public life, the United States was the leader of the free world and at the summit of historic prosperity and peace. It has taken a long time for the historians to discover and figure out Eisenhower's greatness. President Eisenhower anticipated the problems and averted them before they ever became a crisis. His steady hand, his quiet strategy, didn't draw attention like the administrations that followed him. Now, 6 decades later, for that kind of unique leadership, he is considered one of our greatest presidents, which is why we are here today. Like Lincoln, he came from very humble origins. He never forgot the hometown that made him and famously said, "The proudest thing I can claim is that I am from Abilene." He saw the promise that America holds for everyone and the reciprocal responsibility to serve the country that offered him so much. Ike's values were America's values: strength, humility, discipline, integrity. Now we live in an era where it can seem those things no longer matter. But they do. We wouldn't be where we are today without them. We are here today to ensure Ike's place in American and world history for his achievements both as Supreme Allied Commander of Europe and as the 34th President of the United States. When asked about his legacy, Eisenhower responded, and I quote, "The United States never lost a soldier or a foot of ground in my administration. We kept the peace. People asked how it happened. By God, it didn't just happen, I'll tell you that." End of quote. We build this memorial today not only to honor a single person, but as a symbol for all generations of the greatness of America and what our values have made possible at home and abroad. Lest anyone forget what can be achieved in the land of the free and the home of the brave, let them come here and understand what Eisenhower and America have done and what they in turn can do for themselves and our nation's future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. President Eisenhower's West Point class, the class of 1915, was known as the class the stars fell on. That's because over 1/3 of the class became generals, many distinguishing themselves in World War I and World War II. Our next speaker is a West Point superstar of today. Like Ike and so many others before her, Simone Askew decided to seek her education at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Currently in her final year at West Point, she is the highly esteemed first captain of the Corps of Cadets. The first captain, well, she's responsible for the overall performance of the 4,000 cadets at West Point. And she is a liaison between the Corps of Cadets and the West Point leadership. In addition, she does find time to complete her own studies and serve on the crew team. For you Virginians in the room, Simone is a hometown gal, graduate of Fairfax High School's class of 2014, and I have met her, and I assure you, you have every right to brag about that she's from Fairfax. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a young woman who undoubtedly is one of the stars of tomorrow. First Captain, Captain Simone Askew.
Not too sure about Superstar, ma'am, but we'll see what the future has in store for me. Thank you very much for that introduction. I want to say good morning to you all and state that it is really an honor and very humbling to be here today, not only to speak, but also to represent the 4,400 members of the Corps of Cadets, as well as the staff and faculty of the United States Military Academy at West Point, as we honor one of the most distinguished graduates of our long gray line. As aforementioned, the West Point class of 1915 is most referred to as the class the stars fell on, as nearly 40% of the class's 164 graduates attained the rank of general officer. Most of the class include notable leaders such as 5-star generals of the Army, Omar Bradley, as well as the young cadet from Abilene, Kansas, young Dwight D. Eisenhower. When General Eisenhower and his classmates received their commissions as Army officers on that June day more than a century ago, they had no idea what history would have in store for them or what history would really demand of them. And yet they rose to the challenge, answered the nation's call, and served when we needed them most. Since then, generations of West Point graduates have assumed the mantle of leadership within our Army, our armed forces, and our nation, serving and leading around the globe in places such as Vietnam, Panama, Bosnia, and most recently, Iraq and Afghanistan. My classmates and I grew up in a nation of war, and when we chose to come to West Point, we knew that we would enter the Army as officers in a nation still at war. Like the generations who came before us, we did not know for sure what would be demanded of us or where we would be taken. But we can say with certainty that we are ready. We are ready because of the example and inspiration of those like General Eisenhower who came before us, upon whose shoulders today and future generations of West Point leaders now stand. We are grateful to General Eisenhower and the members of the greatest generation for their legacy of duty and selfless service to country, and we are grateful for the inspiration that they have given this generation. We proudly and happily commit ourselves to continuing that legacy so that future generations may be inspired by their example. General, President, and above all, a leader of character, Dwight D. Eisenhower's life and career were dedicated to the values of his alma mater, duty, honor, and country. On behalf of the Corps Cadets at West Point, the men and women who serve there, as well as the tens of thousands of graduates who make up the Long Gray Line, this memorial will serve as a reminder of General Eisenhower's life and legacy and inspire future generations for many years to come. I would like to thank you all for this privilege to speak to you today and remind you, go Army, beat Navy.
When Ike and Mamie, if the family will permit us to be so informal in describing the former president and first lady, married in 1916, they could not have imagined the life that awaited them after the many decades of their marriage. One of their greatest legacies has been their remarkably accomplished family. Today, 3 generations of Eisenhowers represent a cross-section of 21st century America that would astonish Ike and Mamie and make them immensely proud. Professors and policymakers, philanthropists, artists, actors, leaders of NGOs, government officials, and so much more. One of them is our next speaker, Susan Eisenhower. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Susan Eisenhower, representing the Eisenhower family on this very special day for the family and for the rest of us.
Greta, thank you very much for that charming introduction. This is a very emotional day for the Eisenhower family, I have to tell you that. I think growing up as a child, I never would have imagined this honor would have been bestowed on my grandfather, and I'm sure my siblings feel the same way. Thank you, our previous speakers, for the most eloquent description of the reason we are honoring this man today. Let me say that it's a personal pleasure, and I appreciate enormously the honor to stand here to express the thanks of the Eisenhower family for the conception and the realization of the memorial to Dwight D. Eisenhower in Washington, D.C. Today's ceremony represents many, many years of hard work on everyone's part. There are so many people to thank, from our many friends on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue to the countless numbers of them across America. Given the shortness of time, I shall just mention a few. It is with gratitude but also sadness that our 2 visionaries, Senator Dan Inouye and Ted Stevens, and also Rocco Siciliano, are not here with us today. But we are grateful to them for initiating and guiding the development of this memorial. We'd also like to recognize the dedicated efforts of Senator Pat Roberts and Senator Bob Dole. Honestly, Senator Roberts, this would not have happened without you. I'd also like to offer special appreciation to Secretary James Baker for his indispensable contribution in bringing us to this point. Finally, I would like to thank Frank Gehry and his team for their professionalism, for their hard work, and their flexibility in creating this striking memorial that will be placed at this spot. To many, it seems we've traveled a long road to get to this point, and yet, believe it or not, by historic standards, we've arrived here all in good time. The FDR Memorial took 43 years, so I'd say we're way ahead of the timeline. This has been possible because of the strong commitment of the project's advocates and a belief that we have a responsibility to give this memorial resonance and meaning to rising and future generations. This must be done as we seek to make a statement about who we are today and what we still believe in as a country. The tapestry, the backdrop of the memorial itself, will now illustrate the beaches of Normandy in peacetime, a fitting image that captures the transformational era during which Dwight Eisenhower led our Allied forces in Europe during World War II and later during the Cold War. Normandy is an iconic spot that forever symbolizes sacrifice, but also liberation and freedom. It is hallowed ground, which reminds us not only of the bravery and valor of those who served, but also of Dwight Eisenhower's leadership. D-Day was a risky operation and one that came as the stakes in Europe were growing perilously by the day. The success of it, as well as our ultimate victory, depended on millions of men and women who followed. For servicemen, not just from the United States, but from more than a dozen countries, including the many courageous people who fought in the underground. Under Dwight Eisenhower's Supreme Allied Command, the outcome, the end of the war in Europe, was monumental, even if the cost in lives and treasures can never be replaced or forgotten. At a victory celebration and a presentation of honorary citizenship of London at the Guildhall on June 12, 1945, Eisenhower stood before a sea of faces as millions of cheering Londoners poured the streets to honor him. Without a note, he delivered his acceptance speech. Quote, "Humility must always be the portion of any man who receives acclaim earned in the blood of his followers and the sacrifices of his friends," he said. Less than 10 years later, in 1952, Ike won the presidency in a landslide victory. During his 8 years in the White House, he led the country along a path of what he called the middle way, one marked by extraordinary cooperation he fostered between White House and Congress, especially during the 6 years both branches of government were held by rival parties. His administration's accomplishments were many. Senator Roberts articulated so many of them today, from the building of the interstate highway system and balancing the budget numerous times, to advancing major milestones in civil rights that established key judicial precedents, including the appointments of federal judgeships that led the groundwork for much of this country's later progress in civil rights. Eisenhower was committed to building a middle class in this country, a bulwark of political stability from which America's new role in the world could be advanced and sustained. In foreign policy, Eisenhower strengthened NATO, an alliance he had served as first Allied commander, and he brought the end of the Korean War. During the next 7 years of his presidency, he employed sound crisis management to avert the loss of any further American combat troops. At the same time, he stood for freedom without losing an inch of territory while deftly containing the Soviet Union and managing the nuclear threat. My family and I can think of no better legacy for Dwight Eisenhower than to have this memorial serve as a reminder of the simple virtues he espoused, of patriotism, humility, fairness, service to our fellow citizens, as well as sacrifice in the cause of advancing peace and prosperity at home and abroad. My family and I hope that the National Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Memorial will serve to celebrate not just Ike's life, but also those American values that under his leadership made our country, in war and peace, a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Susan, thank you for your support of the memorial to your grandfather and, of course, to our president. And now we have a special treat straight from Ike's hometown of Abilene, Kansas. Emma and Annie Bathurst, ages 17 and 15, are farm kids from Abilene, Kansas. They're involved in sports, marching band, and the 4-H. And they attended Ike's alma mater, Abilene High School. And during grade school, Emma and Annie volunteered at the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Boyhood Home, participating in having a history project in which they portrayed Ike's younger brothers. Did I mention Emma and Annie like to sing? Oh boy, they sure do. In fact, they've been singing together all their lives, and they've come all the way from Abilene, Kansas to Washington to sing just for us. Ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure to introduce to you Emma and Annie.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above thy fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee. sacred dream that sees beyond the years. Thine alabaster city scream, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
All right, now it's time for the moment we've all come here for today, a moment that so many have worked so hard for and waited for. So, without further ado, we'd like to invite the following people to come up on stage. Memorial designer Frank Gehry. The Eisenhower Memorial Commissioners that we have here with us today: Senator Pat Roberts, Congressman Mike Thompson, Senator Gary Peters, Senator Joe Manchin, Congressman Sanford Bishop, Congressman Mike Simpson, Congressman Mac Thornberry, Susan Baines Harris, and Al Godulding. And now, of course, members of the Eisenhower family: David Eisenhower, Susan Eisenhower, and Ann Eisenhower. You all ready? Now, everyone, please put your shovels into the dirt and ready, set, dig.
Ladies and gentlemen, right here in my hand I have the building permit for the National Park Service. At last, we're building at last. We're ready to go. So Frank, the Gilbane Company, GSA, and Clark Construction, let's get this job done. We want to see all of you at the dedication on the 75th anniversary of VE Day, May 8th, 2020. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.